Hi, thanks for being with us today to discuss This Might Hurt.
Thank you guys for having me. Thanks for doing this on a Sunday.
Yeah, this is when we usually meet. So
Oh, nice. Okay.
we're excited to have you. Does anybody want to start? I have a list of questions, but I'll let somebody else start.
Go for it, Brittany.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see here. Do you think any of the characters in the book achieved true fearlessness?
I should ask before we start. Has everybody read it? Is it okay to do spoilers and stuff?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Okay. I never want to just launch in.
No, we love spoilers.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Okay, so the question was, do you think any of the characters achieved true fearlessness? That's a great question. I think, well, no, I don't think that true fearlessness is totally possible. I think some people are less fearful than others. But I think probably Rebecca came the closest to it, or teacher. But she still certainly had her fears. I think, like, in terms of overcoming the fears of her father, she never really got over that, even though she tried to kind of move away from his grip. Really, her entire philosophy and belief system is formed on the things that he taught her as a child. So I think she like comes close in terms of some of the more common fears that the rest of us have, in terms of just physical fearlessness, like she puts herself in harm's way, but there's still a lot of emotional fears that I think she never quite overcomes.
And then what was your inspiration or your research for writing this book?
So like a lot of people, I'm very fascinated by cults. And I really wanted to know what makes someone join a cult and what makes someone lead a cult. So those were the two, actually, like Rebecca and Kit's perspectives were the first two that came along. And Natalie was not a joiner until later, when I wanted to have a third sort of outsider perspective that kind of stands in for the reader who doesn't know all of the customs of Wisewood. And so yeah, that was it's, for me, the psychology of different groups of people are what really fascinate me in my writing. And so with the first book, it was Munchausen by proxy. With this book, it was cults. I find society's outliers very interesting. People that don't make decisions that the rest of us do.
Do you have a sister?
I do. I have two younger sisters. So it's funny, people ask, why did you want to write a book about sisters? And again, that wasn't really the impetus at all. It was just when I was trying to think of that third character, I wanted it to be someone who was more obligated than, let's say, a friend to Kit, but somebody less obligated than a parent. So a sibling just felt like the right balance between those. And yeah, it's because I only have sisters. I don't have a brother. So I thought that could be, it's a relationship I've known all my life. And I thought it would be interesting to explore it, especially as the older sibling, and this is, sort of generalizing, but my experience as the oldest was certainly like in line with kind of that stereotypical oldest, which is you're expected to be the responsible one. You're supposed to take care of the younger ones. And so I thought with Natalie's perspective, that was kind of an interesting dynamic to explore. She and Kit have almost completely different childhoods. Kit was allowed to be a little kid and sort of believe in the stuff that kids believe in, whereas Natalie had to grow up a lot faster to sort of compensate for her parents' shortcomings.
Okay, it's interesting.
Yeah, I think I liked that perspective that Natalie was taking care, basically, and doing all, like, you find out later, you know what I'm saying, like all the Christmases and everything else with the cookies, eating the cookies and making sure there was like the letter from Santa and all of those things. I'm like, I hated that she had to grow up so fast, but I love that she had the heart to take care.
I think too, when you first meet Natalie, she comes off as like pretty sharp, and I don't mean in the smart way. I feel like she comes off as sort of this like, whoa, like not necessarily the most endearing person. But then I think as you sort of peel back the layers, you see like this is a defense mechanism. She has had to be the one that's kind of on the ball her whole life, which allows Kit to be sort of this softer, a little more like wishy-washy person because she's had her older sister watching out for her. So yeah, that was fun to explore.
Did you know how this was going to end when you started writing, or did it evolve and change during the process?
It evolved and changed. So the first draft, this has happened with both of my books so far. The first draft is like completely different than what ended up being on the page in the final copy. So I always try to have a plan before I start writing, but I think it's more of a security blanket than anything, to be honest. It's just less daunting to write 90,000 words when you have some sort of blueprint. But after the first draft, I knew the twist that I was really interested in exploring was someone different is in power than you think they are. And so I knew from that point forward that Kit was actually going to be the one kind of running Wisewood by the end. But I wanted that to not become apparent until the very final pages, really. I think as a reader, maybe, I don't know, you guys can tell me, you're kind of like waiting for that showdown between Natalie and Rebecca, because Natalie is just like gearing up, she's pretty determined. And so it doesn't, necessarily cross your mind that, oh wait, Rebecca is like not even on the island for the entire time that Natalie's there, even though Natalie kind of feels like she can feel her presence, sort of thing. It's, it's her imagination getting, carried away.
Yeah, that did catch me by surprise. Yeah, I certainly didn't. I thought she was there. I'm waiting.
She was
Yeah.
there. Yeah. I like that a lot. That idea that her presence was so felt and so strong. And then very gradually we start to reveal that it is a lingering presence, but
yeah. I think that's where having multiple timelines can really help you out, because, in the other timeline, in Kit's timeline, Rebecca is there. And so you're kind of going back and forth, and you, the reader, of course, aren't thinking like, well, this was 6 months earlier. And, but like, it allows you to pull the strings as the author a bit more.
And you handled that so well, because we have had other books with timelines where there's a lot of jumping around in the timelines. And if it's not handled well, it just seems gimmicky, it just seems like I'm doing this and it's not really working, and it gets irritating, quite frankly. But that wasn't the case. I felt it was very seamless.
Oh, thank you. It's been interesting. I think there has, like, for some readers, there's definitely been confusion about the identity of Rebecca and who is that child narrator throughout. I think, maybe in the first part of the book, you're thinking it's Kit, which is understandable because the back of the book doesn't even, the jacket copy doesn't even mention Rebecca or this third perspective. So it's been kind of interesting to see at what point readers figure out who that anonymous narrator is.
It took me a while.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a gradual thing that I thought that was part of the intrigue of it. Was that
absolutely
reveal. Yeah.
So who was your favorite character to write?
Probably Rebecca, because I think she has the craziest life story. And certainly, I started with her, as an adult in her 60s who's founded Wisewood. And I just wanted to, like I said, what makes somebody start a cult? I just kept working back a little more. I was like, okay, she's this mentalist, and like planning out all those performances was really interesting, because how many times do you light your own character on fire? And then, it just kept going further and further back. And I was like, oh, what if she was interested in magic? And so, yeah, it was getting to explore a lot of things that I haven't before. I think Natalie and Kit both feel a little bit more a part of me and a little bit more relatable, but Rebecca is just so out of my, sphere of experience that, it was interesting. Like, people will ask, with her or with other characters in past books, is it hard to write these like really manipulative sort of liars? And I always say that the hardest part is writing the charisma of them. One thing I found with my research is cult leaders are very charismatic. They're great salespeople. And I have no idea how somebody stands up in a room full of people and completely convinces them to buy into their philosophy. And so that was actually, as an introvert, I was doing a lot of research and just trying to figure out, okay, like, how do I get her to be forceful, but not domineering initially, because I think that's the cult members' experience. It's not we watch these documentaries and we think somebody walks in and they're like, okay, put on this crazy costume, cut your hair into whatever thing. But like, no, it starts out very benevolent and sort of innocuous. So I tried to incorporate that and have it be a very like gradual slip in for Kit.
Mhm.
So
I think that it was, Wisewood was a place where I think some of us would like to go. When we heard about it in the beginning, it sounded like a retreat and a time to start over and to reflect and to move forward. And I think that is very attractive about cults and their initial, as you say, in the initial stage, it's very attractive to people and probably very therapeutic. But then ultimately things can happen.
Yeah, it was interesting when I decided I was going to write a book about a cult, I was like, okay, I get to create my own cult from scratch. What's it going to be? You know, what are their beliefs going to be? And I really wanted it. So I'm glad that I came through for you. Thank you. I really wanted it to be something that at first you could kind of nod your head to and say like, yeah, this, you know, who hasn't wanted to get rid of their phone for a bit, or who hasn't wanted to be fearless? I didn't want it to be a sex cult or a religious cult, you know, these things that would right away that are going to like turn some readers off and be like, I would never fall for that. Cause I think that's what we do think about cults, is like, it could never happen to me. And so I did want it to be something where it seems like, yeah, this seems like it could be a good thing. And then I think it's different for different readers. So you guys tell me, when was the point when you were like, oh, now you've lost me? Like, now it's gone too far, I'm out.
I think those fearless challenges basically were like they branded her toe and the dunking in the water, like the cold water. I'm like, until that point, I'm like, this sounds like a really nice break from real life. Like I work 80+ hours a week sometimes. I'm like, I'd give up my phone and say, you know what, y'all, I'll see you when I see you on the other side. But then those inner circle things started happening and I'm like, okay, that's where I'm like, too far.
Yeah.
I think maybe the ladies with like the buzzed heads, and especially Sophia's character, seems so kind of creepy and eerie, making like the banshee noises and just seeming like really unstable. I think at that point I would be like, okay, I need to get out of here.
Yeah.
I think when we started to realize that there was surveillance going on, you know, when they realized that yeah, she thought her friends were
the cameras,
and they weren't. So it was a little, you know, at first it was like, well, that could have happened. They could have been having a therapy session and mentioned fears of somebody else they talked to. So, I mean, it was kind of a slow draw you in, but there were clues, I think, leading up to.
But then the removal of the cameras and then just like also removing the blinds. I was like, ooh. So you're like, everybody's surveying everybody else. I'm like, I'm good.
Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting too, as I researched real life retreats. And it is, you know, I think there's a section in the book, maybe when Ruth is taking them through orientation, where it really is true that there's silent retreats where like, not only are you not supposed to touch people, you're not supposed to speak, you're not supposed to smile. And I was like, oh my God, like, I don't know if they last 6 months per se, but I was like, wow, this is really extreme. So it was even like, I felt some of my stuff I had to like dial back a little, because I feel like if I was the reader and the first thing is like, you're not allowed to speak here, I was like, oh my God, like people will immediately run the other way, but people pay money to go do these things, you know?
Yeah, if it was one of those silent retreats, I'd be out.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what'd you say, Brooke?
Said if it was one of those silent retreats, I'd be out.
Yeah. Also a lot harder to develop conflict and sort of character relationships and closeness if none of them can speak. So I was like, nah, it's not going to work.
Becky, what were you saying?
I was just gonna say, I was a little hesitant right there on the dock with I've forgotten his name, the man who
Gordon
brings Surly on the boat. Yeah, I thought, wait, don't go.
Yeah, it's funny, you know, so it's, you know, it is a suspense novel after all. So you also have to sort of have this sense of foreboding. It's like walking that tightrope of like creating some sense of foreboding without, again, being like red flags everywhere. I'm not even going to go along for the ride as the reader. But I do think, you know, from Natalie's perspective, which is when you do like see that boat ride with Gordon and everything, she's already made up her mind about why before she ever goes, you know, so it was a lot easier in that perspective to make everything seem sinister. And that's why I also thought playing with the dynamics of the weather, Natalie goes in winter, Kit goes in summer, and their descriptions of the island are almost like they're in two completely different places. So yeah, it's just interesting. Depending on the mindset you're going into a place with, your perception of it will be completely different.
Well, and certainly Natalie was, forget Gordon. She's not going to worry about Gordon. That wasn't her issue. Whereas if it'd been somebody else, who was maybe more, I don't know, coming for a different reason, but Natalie's reason. So like, forget Gordon. I'm coming out here to get my sister. So
yeah.
Did you research any actual cults, or were there specific cults that you looked into that you based your cult on, Wisewood?
I researched a ton of real life cults. It feels weird to say what my favorite ones are.
I was trying to find a way to ask that without being like, Stephanie, what's your favorite cult?
Yeah.
I'm putting that in my notes here.
She does our author recap, by the way. So
Oh,
she's gonna be
nice.
like, so
Okay.
Stephani's favorite cult was.
Yeah, exactly. Because I'm gonna say Jonestown and 900 people died. So that's a horrible, but it is. I found Jim Jones to just be an absolutely fascinating character. I read this book called The Road to Jonestown by Jeff Gwynne. So if you're interested in cults, that's a really thorough, and it reads like fiction. It's a really interesting account. But then on the flip side, I also read a survivor's memoir from Jonestown. And that one was called Seductive Poison. I'm going to forget her name now. Deborah Layton wrote it. She was actually at Jonestown and survived the mass suicide. That is definitely one that was of interest. I thought the Manson cult was really interesting as well. Basically the real life cult research was less to help it form my own, and more to study like, what are the commonalities between cult leaders? What characteristics do they possess? And I already touched on some of them, charisma, great salesmanship. On the flip side, like manipulative, narcissists, almost to a T, often paranoid, which is when things usually go south. And then also I was looking for commonalities in members. I thought that there would be a similar list of traits, but actually the only one I could find across all of them was that they're all looking for deeper meaning in their lives. They're all searching for some sort of higher purpose. And that actually made the job of depicting Kit a lot easier, because who can't relate to that? We've all felt a little lost at some points, or like we wanted to shake things up. So I think once I understood, this really could be, someone in your life, it could be you, whatever, that made it feel less like I thought I was going to have to draw this character who's just very naive or gullible or whatever. But that in my research, that was not the case. It's, there are people from all walks of life, rich, poor, educated, not. So yeah, that was what the real life research was for. I wouldn't say, I researched like what their different rules were, and the customs. It didn't really, I tried to create my own from scratch as much as possible. A lot of cults do talk about fear. So, Manson talked about fear a lot. NXIVM, which is a more recent cult, talks about fear. But I think observing some of the commonalities, like it's really common for cults to use blackmail to keep you in them. NXIVM did that, and so did Jonestown. So that helped with forming some of the quests. And then branding, like NXIVM used that. So it's kind of like picking and choosing. Like I didn't want to do anything that was completely out of scope of anything they would do. Again, it's always bringing it back to the psychology and like wanting it to feel real, not like, well, this is just, flashy for flashy's sake. So I try to let the research sort of inform decisions, and then just like go off and create my own little world.
I was curious that you had some people who left. Was this in, when I think of cults, I think of people getting sucked in like forever until some huge, it breaks out in some huge way. Whereas you had some characters who came. I'm trying to think of the two friends that Kit met pretty early on,
Right.
and then they were allowed to leave. So
Yeah.
I thought that was a little different. Are some cults built like that you can come join up for a while and then?
Yeah, I think so. The cult leaders or leadership, of course, would love for 100% member commitment, but it's just not realistic, especially as they grow and grow in size. So it depends, you know, some people, if you haven't been a member long, then it's a lot easier to get out. If you have, they can make your life very challenging. There were certainly instances in Jonestown where I read, you know, one guy left and then like mysteriously turned up dead on railroad tracks like a month later or something. So that certainly insinuates that the cult had something to do with it. But on the other hand, if you're talking about hundreds of people, it's just not realistic that you, one person or a handful of people are going to be able to physically contain them all, even if they are on an island. So yeah, I wanted it to be basically these members who only come for 6 months are the ones who are funding the lifestyle of the inner circle and the people who stay forever. You know, without these people paying membership dues, the island's not keeping afloat. Rebecca has this, you know, this check from Jeremiah's death, but sorry, not Jeremiah, Gabe, but it's not going to last forever. So yeah, they kind of need these people who just like come in for these short-term things and pay their dues. And I mean, it is like Kit's, you know, Kit sort of accuses April and Georgina, like, you're just coming in for a 6-month story that you can tell your grandkids someday. Your life is going to go just back to how it was. Like, you're not going to be using your phone any less or whatever. And she's probably right to a certain extent. You know, are most of us going to completely change our lives? It's probably unrealistic, but I think it's interesting to have people like, especially people like Georgina, who are so vocally questioning the place, because I think that, again, there's plenty of readers who would have that very same reaction. So to just go into this place and everybody is like unquestioningly on board doesn't feel realistic to what a real little society would be.
And I think that would make it more attractive to somebody who's kind of looking for a change, and they go, oh, well, I can go for 6 months. I'm not going into some kind of a cult, you know, heavy duty cult that my relatives and friends are going to make fun of, or like, what are you going to become, a Moonie? You know, what's going on? That's not going to happen, because you're going, no, it's like a retreat. I'm going for 6 months. And so it would be more appealing to maybe more people, and more people who you would want, because they might have the means to come, spend their money and leave.
Right. And you think word of mouth is their strongest way to, you know, to get more people to come in. So yeah, that was definitely part of it. Again, I think real people who have joined real cults, like, nobody goes to sort of this potluck dinner or church event or whatever and is like, I'm doing this for the rest of my life. That's just not how we work as humans. There's very few things that we would commit to forever without really any information on. So this sort of gradual dipping in of the toe, I think is probably truer to life. And I think, you know, Rebecca really has a knack for identifying the people who are most likely to stick with her and sort of become true believers. And that is the skill of a cult leader, is being able to identify those people and pull them in.
Mm-hmm. I've mentioned this before here. I was in Atlanta traffic and I would listen to a podcast, and I listened to true crime podcasts, and this one, and it mentioned a cult, and I didn't catch the name of it, you know, because there's noise from outside and everything. So I thought, well, when I get to work, I'm going to Google this story, because what had happened was a woman this was in California, had joined a cult and kind of dropped out, and her friends were worried about her, and it ended up, she did die at the cult under mysterious circumstances. So I thought, oh, it's very intriguing, I'll look it up. Well, I Googled, you know, California and dying at cult, and I'll put in all the words, and so many results came up. I was shocked. It was like, how could that possibly have death at a cult in California in the 1970s pull up, you know, all these different records. There are lots of cults out there. I mean, they may be very small, but there's a lot of them.
One of the creepiest things I found during my research was just somebody was being interviewed, I think a previous cult member or something. And she said, the cults you've heard about are just the ones that have failed somehow. You know, something got out and they made the news or whatever, but there's tons of cults that are just flourishing along, and we've never heard of them because the members are not talking about it. And that was really like, oh God, like, I know we sort of think of this as like this anomaly that like never happens. There's like one every few, decades now. I mean, there were a lot more in the 70s to be sure. But yeah, that was very eye-opening for me.
Of course, you immediately have me thinking about, oh, about these circumstances. Oh, are there cults out there that I missed? I didn't realize. I'm immediately thinking, who's in one? Yeah. Immediately.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It really is interesting. It's these social groups, it's church organizations, whatever. And again, they really do seem just like you move to a new place, or like maybe you lost a job or whatever it is, and you find a bit of belonging, you find some friends, and any of us could have gone through those experiences, but we just didn't join a club that then later, turned into a cult. And the thing that's kind of hard to square, and one of the reasons that I think Jonestown is so interesting, not to keep harping on them, but like Jim Jones started out as a force for good, in Indiana. He helped integrate schools, police stations, like a lot of organizations. And he was really respected in the civil rights community, which is crazy now to think about, but that's why so many people were initially attracted to his message, because he was all about equal rights. And so, yeah, it wasn't until he sort of moved to California and started getting more people. And then of course, went down to Guyana, and that was when things really turned south. He was taking more and more drugs, becoming more and more paranoid. But it is hard to, I think we really like to categorize people and put them in boxes. And my favorite thing to do in writing is resist that, because I think the best villains have great, like good sides too. Nobody is, should say very few people are all bad. And I don't think anyone is all good. So trying to sort of capture that range of humanity is an interesting challenge as a writer.
Well, I thought the initial message as we get to Wildwood about people facing their fears, and some of them had a lot to do with their upbringing and issues with their parents, and saying, okay, you're going to face these and head on without any kind of, you're not going to gloss over it. You're not going to, they were stopped when they seemed to be reimagining things in a more positive light. They were told to really examine it accurately. And I thought, well, there's a lot of good there. These people need to move on from this. So there was, like you say, with Jim Jones, there was a lot of good, helpful information there, but then it starts the power corrupts as they get successful at it.
Which makes sense, because if you think about your own experiences and decision making, if you joined a group and they immediately started browbeating you or insulting you or making you do crazy things and you were getting nothing out of it, why would you stay? So there has to be some positive dynamic to it. And I think a lot of what we see, in documentaries or other, novels or whatever, it just jumps straight into the deep end. And so things just seem so crazy. And, you're watching these Netflix documentaries and it's easy to go, why on earth would anyone join this? But it's because you're not taking the time to like see that long ramp up period. We're just going kind of straight to the climax of the cult, which is when fireworks and disaster happens.
I was thinking about that one. There's a documentary, and I should have looked it up to know the name of it, but it was the group, I think it was in the 70s, out in Antelope, where they kind of, the cult leader they pretty much took over the town. They got and there's a documentary about that, and you do see a lot of the people, and they get interviewed later, and they're these very rational, reasonable people who had very normal lives. They were doing fine in their lives, but they felt something was missing. And you realize these aren't just really weak, vulnerable people. These are people that thought there's a piece of the puzzle missing here, and they did get pulled in. But again, the documentaries only got so much time, so they quickly jumped to all the poisoning the water system and all, just wow. And they really show in that how the guy was out for financial gain. It's like, give over your inheritance, give over your we need the title to whatever you own.
Yeah. And that's the challenge as a storyteller, because, on one hand, people hear some things about a cult and they do want to kind of get to like that, to the crazy action stuff. So you do have to, there's a bit of a slow burn, I think, and this might hurt to sort of get to that point, but I really wanted to pay it off. But yeah, the Wild Wild Country is the documentary.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just remember the one character besides Sheila, who was like a crazy,
Yes.
maniacal, like amazing character.
Amazing.
Yeah. The other character, I can't remember his name now, but he was a lawyer who was interviewed throughout the series. And what really struck me about him was that he would clearly like return to it in a heartbeat. I think he even said, if the group was still sort of functioning, he would think about returning. And it's been 30 years or however long since he was in it. And it really speaks to the power and just a sense of belonging that people really can feel. He can talk about all the horrible things the cult has done, and yet there was something in it that was such a deep connection for him. And so, yeah, trying to navigate those two things that seem so opposite I just think that's what's interesting about cults.
We haven't really talked about the performances.
I was going to talk about the magic. That was my next question, as I was going to switch from cult to what kind of research did you do on magic and mentalism and all of that?
Sure. So for magic, I researched about Houdini a lot. So everything that's, in the book about Houdini is true. I never really knew anything about him other than he was supposed to be this crazy magician. So yeah, that was more of obviously Rebecca's childhood years. And I didn't get super deep into magic, just deep enough that like I had some tricks that she could do. I needed to understand, how does a rope trick work and things like that. It was really more of the mentalism stuff that I spent a lot of time on, because I think that was more, I guess it was more of the cause of why she ended up going on to found Wisewood. And so for that, I studied David Blaine's work. In the UK, there's a very famous mentalist called Darren Brown. I studied his work. Marina Abramovic is a performance artist. I looked at her stuff a lot. Who are they? Oh, Tony Robbins. Interestingly, even though he doesn't really do this kind of like endurance stuff, he still is somebody, and I'm not calling him a cult leader, but he is somebody who really can captivate thousands of people at a time. And so there's a very interesting Netflix documentary called I Am Not Your Guru. And just sort of that helped hammer home that people like this in these positions like truly believe what they're selling. Like you can tell he's not just like putting on a front like, okay, I'll host these workshops, whatever. Like he truly believes it. And so I think that there's an interesting parallel between cult leaders and these sort of like mentalists and performers. Like, of course, they both need this level of showmanship. Some of the mentalists, like if you look at someone like Darren Brown, he is fully like, I'm fooling people. He's written books about it, So some people are more like, if I can use the drinking their own Kool-Aid, more than others are. But I think, yeah, I guess when I was trying to think of how could Rebecca truly illustrate or sort of be the epitome of fearlessness, one of the most interesting things that came to mind was with these like physical demonstrations of it. So that was, it was a dark exercise, but it was also a fun exercise to think, what are all of the physical ways that you can really practice fearlessness? And so I just started going through, I'm sure I'm on some sort of FBI watch list at this point. I just like made a list, she could light herself on fire. She could do this, she could do, she could be in the coffin. And then I just kind of thought, which ones are going to be the ones scenically that are most interesting, that are going to have you sort of on the edge of your seat as you're reading through it. So yeah, it was a lot of fun to research those things, because I had never really paid attention to people like David Blaine. Like I knew, I had heard of some of his stunts, but so yeah, that's what made her character so fun to write, because it's less of the everyday and just it's completely bonkers, like the way she gets from point A to point Z. So that was really interesting.
Well, and sometimes even hearing her thoughts in her head as she lights herself on fire or runs out of air in the, the coffin, or when she's underwater and like the ice basically is in her lungs,
Yeah.
I'm like you sound pretty afraid to me. I'm like, I know it's like outwardly you're trying to be like, I'm fearless.
Yeah.
This is how you overcome. But I'm like,
Yeah.
you sound frightened.
I'm
Yeah,
afraid you're
I mean,
going to haunt me a little bit. I'm a scuba diver, so the whole scene with, I thought, okay, I'm going to have that in my head on the next trip. So
it's funny that you say that, because I have scuba dove as well, and there is actually a certain eeriness to it when you get really, really far underwater, and you learn you can't just, if something happens, you can't just float to that, like swim to the top as fast as you can, because you risk hurting your lungs. And so there is something really creepy about the idea of being kind of trapped underwater. I mean, it's beautiful. I love scuba diving, but that actually did kind of inform some of that scene. But yeah, going back to that she seems like she's pretty fearful, that again is just kind of my own imagination. And I just wonder, like, do these people, when they're doing these crazy things, do they actually not feel fear? And so I don't know, I ended up deciding, no, I think they would still have some trepidation, even if they're like putting on a brave face. It's hard for me to imagine. I mean, I guess, certain people, like I've read that psychopaths or sociopaths are unable to feel fear. I don't know if that, if that's true or not, but I don't think that Rebecca is a sociopath despite her behavior. So I figured giving her some fear, even though she never lets it stop her from doing anything, but she still feels it. She never cancels a performance. She goes ahead with it. And I think that during these mentalism performances, this is when she starts to get this godlike complex, where she actually thinks, I've done it. I can't die from this. I feel no pain. I am like more than human, basically.
mhm.
And
Yeah, when
that's,
she burns herself and she's in the hospital and she's telling Gabe, like, I don't hurt.
Yeah.
I'm fine. I'm like, girl, you're not fine. It's not going to be fine eventually. You might be on some really good drugs right now, but I'm like, as soon as you
Yeah.
go home, you're not going to be fine.
yeah, exactly.
Well, and
But
then her 5 followers too were very interesting.
Oh, right, right.
they were a very last minute addition to the book. In the final draft they came about, and yeah, I think I felt at that point I needed some proof that she's able to get even a small cluster of people to follow her and to really love that feeling of being adored, which would then push her to want to replicate that even after she loses the 5. And so, yeah, that, opens the door for Wisewood to come into existence.
That was a nice arc, because she kind of saw all this performance art starting to ebb, and the five, even though they were so loyal, you showed that they were kind of moving on with their life. Time was going by and they were starting to have other aspects of their life. And she realized that, and it's like, well, what do you do when you're that kind of a magic performance artist and it's ebbed? What do you do next? And that really seemed like this logical, maybe not logical, but it seemed like a really perfect kind of solution for her.
Yeah,
to,
I mean,
to have that island.
Yeah, exactly. Because now she literally has a captive audience. Like you can't leave unless she's giving you the keys to the boat, basically. Initially, when I was trying to decide on the setting, I always knew I wanted it to be in Maine, but I thought maybe the North Maine woods, which is, right on the border with Canada. But then I thought, if you run far and fast enough, you could still escape that. And I was like, you can't escape this island unless you have a boat. I mean, I think the temperature, it runs around 50 degrees. So a wetsuit, and most people are not going to be able to swim 8 miles across like basically part of the Atlantic Ocean. So yeah. I think it just ups the tension and this sort of feeling of caginess.
Mm-hmm. That was an interesting part when Rebecca's in the water and we're hearing her thoughts.
Yeah. You mean in the final chapter?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That was, It was
Not when she was a child, but that's interesting
Yeah.
too.
I was
But
gonna say, can we talk about Sir for a minute? Like, he
Sure.
gave me the heebie-jeebies every
Yeah.
time he was
I
brought
don't want
up.
to talk about him.
I
He is
was
definitely the closest thing I've written to just like an all evil character.
I was worried like he was gonna hit them or do something, but
I
like
know,
she
like
made it.
molest them.
hmm Like that's kind of maybe it was just because of rose gold and that was in the back of my head. You know what I'm saying? Like where you have like that parent. But I'm
Yeah.
like, there was something about it where I'm like, what's he gonna do? I'm like, he's done horrible things to them. Like how
Yeah.
they have to get the points, -2, +1.
Yeah.
That's worth 5 points. I'm like, just to go to sleep at night.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I do the same thing as a reader where when you sense this parent or figure of authority, like becoming more and more overbearing, you are kind of waiting for like, is there going to be physical abuse? Is there going to be sexual abuse? Like what's happening here? But it's easy to forget that sometimes that like emotional abuse can be just as awful, and just sort of like have that same grip over someone. So I knew he was never going to touch the girls or his wife, but it's just they're still so afraid of him and he rules with such an iron fist that you get the same effect anyway,
Mhm.
You're still very afraid of him. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing that's, interesting about him is that he does it under the guise of like, I'm doing what's best for you. I want you to be the best version of yourself, which is obviously extremely messed up, like the methods he's going about it. But it also greatly informs who Rebecca is. And I would argue is like the single biggest reason she goes after this whole fearless thing becomes her entire life's work because of him.
What do you think his backstory is that he was also abused? Because they say like you break the cycle or you don't. So was Sir abused that made him rule with this iron fist and have such like high standards, do you think?
I mean, I think if he was either abused or he was like not treated extremely well by his parents. But I also think I don't want to generalize, but I do think like parenting in various generations was very different. It was different. I had to take out any so Rebecca would have been growing up in, I think, and I can't remember her age, maybe the 60s. And so first of all, in the childhood stuff, I had to take out any time references, right? Because Kit would have been growing up in the 90s and I didn't want to, originally there were references to the kind of cars and things like that. So take all of that out. But I think this sort of like sink or swim, like toss them in the water and like they'll figure it out. It's been interesting to observe, I think, how parenting has changed over the decades. So I'm not a parent, so I can't speak super intelligently to it, but or I should say from experience, but I think Sir's sort of gruffer treatment would have been more acceptable back then. Certainly he takes it too far. I'm not arguing that he doesn't, but I think somebody teaching their child how to swim then versus now are two very different experiences. So I think it's a combination of that. Like, I think he's kind of a product of his time, but also that he's probably had a bit of a dark past himself. He's just never, he's not someone who coddles obviously by any stretch. It's just sort of teach by doing, like just literally throwing someone in the deep end and
like literal sink or swim.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got two choices here.
Yeah.
If I'm remembering correctly, doesn't Rebecca's older sister take care of Sir as an old man?
Yes,
I remember that because if I am right, I liked that's a reality that children who've been abused, no matter what kind of way, often they're still very loyal to the end. And I appreciated that bit of realism. It's, I certainly wanted to dismiss him, get rid of him immediately, but that's how it often is. So I appreciated that piece.
Well, and I thought the secret was going to be that somebody killed Sir. You know what I'm saying?
I'm
Like,
sure
that's what I
people will
was
be-
waiting for
Yeah.
and I was hoping for, I guess, is, you know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Like, Sir is dead and I
Yeah.
did it, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I realized that Sir's ending is a bit unsatisfactory in the sense that you do want that sense of
Mhm.
like Rebecca finally gets to
Mhm.
either stand up to him or get some
Mhm.
sort of revenge or whatever. But to your point, I think what actually happens in real life more frequently is these people have miserable lives or miserable parents, and then they just kind of eke out of life, and
Mhm.
yes, we do. It depends on the person. Some people say, screw you, I'm never talking to this parent or whomever again. But some people say, you know what, I only get one mom and one dad or whatever. And I'm going to salvage this relationship to the extent possible. Also, a lot of times people maybe don't change, but maybe mellow out a bit from the time, when they were a parent of a young child to now when they're a parent of adult children. And I don't think certainly that Sir has really had a big transformation, but I think Jack she sort of maybe, I don't know if accepts him for who he is the right way of putting it, but I think she's just kind of resigned herself to the fact this is the father that I have.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
if I want a relationship with this person, I have to meet him where he is, sort of thing.
Mhm.
Which, yeah, it does sort of feel like womp womp, but I mean, I do think that it's true to life, that's the experience of a lot of people.
That's a good point. It really
Yeah,
is.
that's a good point.
I mean, how many of us really like go and like seek revenge against people who have wronged us or treated us poorly? For the most part, hopefully we just kind of either remove them from our lives or try to
Mhm.
ignore those toxic parts or whatever.
That is, yeah, when you put it like that, that's a really good point. I'm like, but I thought that was going to be the big secret, you know what I'm saying? Like, not the assisted suicide or basically the death of the mom, but something happened to Sir. And I'm like, it's about time.
Yeah, I'm sorry for
Buddy.
the disappointment.
I'm like, buddy, you were horrible. It's about time something happened to you.
He still dies in the end, so
He does, which he does, just not the way I thought he was going to.
Yeah.
Or felt like he
We haven't-
deserved to.
We haven't talked about the mothers.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was interesting. So they're both pretty ineffectual. I mean, I think Peggy, Natalie and Kit's mother, at least, she wants to be there. And at times she is a good mother, but because of her mental health issues, she just can't support the children in the way that she needs to or should have. So I think, well, I mean, I can only speak to my own experience, but I have more sympathy for her because she's doing her best. She's falling short, but she certainly loved the kids. I don't think I ever even named Rebecca's mother in the book because I wanted her to feel that much like she was just a non-entity, really. I mean, Sir just, again, that iron fist, she was one of the kids, basically, his wife. She was as afraid of him as Rebecca and Jack were. And I felt a lot more frustration with her, even though, it's interesting because she was sort of under the same mind control and stuff that Rebecca and Jack were. But I guess because they're children, we just feel a certain sense of sympathy and a sense of indignation or fury or whatever, that like this mother is supposed to be keeping these children safe and she's doing nothing to get them out of the situation. She's just kind of going along with, well, this is God's plan for me. This is the hand I was dealt. I can't do anything about it. So I found her mothering to be much more infuriating than Peggy's.
But it was very much in line with what you see with abused women.
Yeah.
The emotional,
Yeah.
financial, all the abuse that he exerted. Yeah, that's what you see, that
Yeah.
ineffectiveness. Sometimes that's the response.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing too, is, I mean, we don't really get any peek at her interiority whatsoever. We only see her from Rebecca's childhood point of view, which is just, you're making everything worse or you're not doing anything at all. And so Rebecca never forgives her for that. Really, no one in her family. And it really becomes, as Rebecca becomes an adult, nobody is good enough. Nobody did the things they were supposed to do. So she just kind of shuts everyone in her life out, from college friends to family members to whomever. And that's why she ends up having to start over again and again with a blank slate, where it's, okay, can I find a new group of people who live life the way that I want them to?
Did how you feel about cults change from when you started writing?
Yeah,
to
I
the
think
end?
I came to see them less as sort of these like zany, crazy group of people, and more just, I think I just felt a lot more compassion. You know, what drew me to them was just like, it's this little microcosm of society who again has chosen not to abide by the rules that the rest of us have, and that's really interesting. But I think I just had to have a deeper understanding of both the people who join and lead them, and being able to find a bit of empathy for everyone, despite the terrible things that people have done while in them.
Did your feelings about magic change?
I mean, I definitely have an appreciation for magic as well, but for mentalism, really. It's just a very interesting art, you know, people like I actually did see some performers like swallowing glass and doing things like that. Yeah, it really is. I mean, I don't know how they're doing it. I didn't try to actually, oh, is somebody, oh, I have to jump off, I see. Bye. Yeah, it was interesting. Like some of the things I needed to know the reveal and how the trick worked, but others I didn't really. And I almost didn't want to know more answers than I needed to, because I think that that sort of illusion of that something truly magical has been done was like kind of good to maintain that, if that makes sense. Instead of just like kind of giving you the answers to everything, like, oh, this is easily done, all you have to do is this, and then now it's done. And it's like, oh, well, now that doesn't feel like something special that someone's done. It just feels like, oh, if you train hard enough, anyone can do it.
I liked how, you know, we were charmed, at least I was, by the young Rebecca when she's learning magic, and she's in high school, and she's a bit of an outcast. She doesn't really have a strong circle of friends, and she's doing these shows, and they're attracting people. And it does show some of her stage fright, and sometimes things don't go quite as she planned. It's not like she automatically became a star. You know, there was a process for her, and we don't always see the process. A lot of times we're just told, and then she was, you know, a magician. And in her case, even though you've got to be economical, because you didn't want to spend all that much time on it, because you had so much more story to tell, we did get that young Rebecca, and we did see the process as from a young person into her young adult life, and as she created her arc for her celebrity, or her as she grew in renown.
The more that I did with Rebecca's development and storyline, the more I was like, oh, this could have just been a book on its own. It's like, I did, to your point, find myself having to just kind of, okay, pull it back. This can't become the Rebecca book. You know, there's two other characters here. But yeah, there were a lot of dynamics at play. And that's a great feeling as a writer, when like things just start to flow and you're like, God, there's so many different avenues I could go with this.
And she did seem like an adolescent, where I think we don't always realize how hard it is to get the voice of a child or an adolescent. You know, that's why people who write children's books, people think, oh, well, it's, you know, it's a children's book author. Yeah, but to get into and have the voice that's going to appeal not to the adults reading it, but to the children reading it, to really have that voice. And I think that's kind of a tricky thing for a writer, to really get a voice of a child, as you did, and then of an adolescent also.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I've never written a children's book, but I would also imagine that is very different from writing a child's voice for an adult, you know. So that's, you know, I'm doing that right now with my third book. There's a part, you know, that's written from the perspective of a 6-year-old, and then this person getting older. And it is, especially if you've never had a 6-year-old, it is tough to know. And that's what I have editors for, to say, they sound a little too mature. Because
Mhm.
the hardest part is if it truly sounded the way that a 6-year-old sounded, you'd be like, oh my God, like when is this going to be over? You know, it's, so you got to kind of tread that needle of like making them sound youthful, but also like, okay, let's get to the point. Let's not be ring all over.
Can you tell us anything else about that book that you're working on now?
Oh, sure. So, okay. So it starts with an American woman who is living in a huge manor in the English countryside. When the book starts, she hasn't spoken to anyone in 3 years. She hasn't left her house in 3 years. We don't know why. And then one day, this elderly British woman comes and knocks on her door, and things unroll from there.
That sounds really interesting. We'll have to read that.
Oh, we will be. I can tell you, we'll definitely be reading that as a book club. I'm like, we will always read your books. I'm a big
Oh,
fan.
thank you. Thank you. That's so nice to hear. Yeah, it's it just came from an interest. I've always been interested in recluses, and without giving too much away, just an interest in sort of like obsession and stalking and all of that fun stuff. So.
When is this one out?
I don't know yet because I'm only on draft 2. So
Okay.
probably, I would guess probably early 2024.
Nice.
Yeah.
So when do you think Wise would cross the line? And then are there any of the principles that were there that you agree with?
When did Wisewood cross the line? Well, I'll start with the principles. So I think in theory, all 3 principles, yes, I agree with. The way they put it in practice, no, I don't agree with. Like, sure, I want to live a life in which I am free. Great. I mean, I don't think if you heard that sentence, anyone would be like, nope, strong disagree. So yes, again, that goes back to just wanting you to be nodding your head and going, yeah, that sounds good. For me, I mean, I think a lot of what you guys have already mentioned, certainly the quests are like, what is happening? The blackmail, the branding, it's all too much. But I also think Rebecca, it starts with Rebecca. Rebecca crosses the line when she starts to feed the idea to Kit that April and Georgina are talking about her in sessions, which is a total lie. But that is what cult leaders do, is they sort of make you mistrust your fellow members so that you, the leader, are the only person they will trust. And when you have this, when all of these people have only an emotional connection with you, that gives you a lot of power. And so yeah, I think almost from the beginning, I think it's in Kit's maybe 2nd or 3rd session with Rebecca, that Rebecca starts planting the seed of, you can't trust these other people, you can only trust me. That, this is not a place that's truly built on relationships and trust and healing. Rebecca's creating just as many problems and fearfulness as she purports to be getting rid of. Maybe you're dealing with some of your childhood baggage, but you're about to create a whole bunch of adult baggage in this place.
Do you think that once somebody goes to a place like that, they can actually return to their lives as what they've known it as before, like as a normal person? I don't know if that makes sense at all.
Yeah.
Or go ahead.
If you were going to add on to the question, I think, no, I don't think that they can go back as the person they were before. I think they can go back and eventually lead a normal, flourishing life, probably with some therapy. But no, I think all of our experiences that we go through in life change us, some to bigger extents than others. And I guess I shouldn't just say a flat no. It would depend how long you were a member, but I'm assuming you mean somebody who for years has really dedicated their life to this. I don't see how you could come out of that unchanged and just, okay, I'm just going to compartmentalize and that experience no longer affects me. And now I'm the person I was before. I don't think that would be possible. Any other questions?
I feel like this was one of the most interesting book club discussions we've had in a while. This is a fun one.
Oh, thank you. Good. I'm really glad that I could join, and I'm happy to join anytime. It's probably, I mean, it's one of the best parts of being an author is actually getting to discuss the whole book. Cause in interviews, it's always just kind of no spoilers, only what could be discussed kind of in the first few chapters. So it's really nice to get to talk to you guys and like hear what people's impressions of different characters were and what you thought about different twists and stuff like that. So thank you for having me. This is great.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely be reading the next one. I'm super excited. I love Darling Rose Gold, so can't wait for that.
Yeah, thanks for arranging this, Brittany.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here with us. And then if you're interested, I don't know what your publisher does or anything like that, but we have done like ARC reading as a book club before, so you can discuss the whole book and we can keep it like quiet until launch day if you want, you know what I'm saying?
Oh,
But
okay.
we'll record it, do the synopsis, and then everybody will write reviews for you, so you'd have hopefully like 10 to 15 reviews depending on how many people are able to read it and join us.
Oh, cool. Yeah, for sure. Remind me where you guys are based again?
Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay. All right.
Well,
Then
I
I
mean,
will.
I am, but they're actually everywhere. So Heather's in Ohio, Becky's in Virginia.
Mhm.
I'm in
Okay, but
Woodstock. Yeah, we're
in the US though.
yes.
I guess
yeah.
is what I was.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're
I
in-
wanted
yeah.
to know which publisher to. Yeah, I'll talk to my US publisher for sure.
That would just be a lot of fun. Like, I think we'd enjoy it.
Yeah, it's nice to, by the time you get to talk about a book, you've not been kind of in that world for almost a year, really. So
Yeah.
I'm always like, I always want to talk about my books like right after I'm done with them, so it'd be fun to talk a bit sooner in the process.
We would enjoy that as well, and then help you launch and support it.
Yeah, great. That sounds great. Well, thank you for spending some of your Sunday with me. I think you guys are going to keep chatting and I'll just jump off. Does that work?
Yeah, I think that's great.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys so much
you.
again for having
Thank
me.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for being
Thank
here.
you.
Have a good rest of your day.
You
All right.
too.
Bye.
Bye.